For generations, Dennis Mitchell was every neighbor's worst nightmare. He wasn't evil, he wasn't malicious, he was simply impossible to contain. Broken flower pots, ruined afternoons, countless headaches for poor Mr. Wilson. Yet, no one ever questioned whether something was wrong with Dennis. He was just Dennis the Menace. But what if that same little boy showed up in a neighborhood today? Would we still see an energetic kid with an overactive imagination, or would we see someone who needed evaluation, support, or even a diagnosis? Today, let's explore what Dennis the Menace might look like through the lens of modern childhood. Dennis isn't like Bart Simpson. He isn't trying to upset adults. Most of the time, he genuinely believes he's helping. His biggest problem isn't cruelty, it's impulse control. He acts first and only later realizes something went terribly wrong. Whether he's digging holes, bringing frogs into the house, or improving someone else's property, Dennis operates on pure curiosity. He's driven by enthusiasm, not intention. That's an important distinction. Dennis debuted in 1951. Childhood looked different. Kids roamed neighborhoods unsupervised. Parents expected scraped knees. Teachers expected restless children. Behavior that today might prompt meetings and documentation was often dismissed as boys being boys. That doesn't necessarily mean the past handled everything better. It means society viewed childhood differently. Today, we understand far more about child development, emotional regulation, executive functioning, and learning differences than people did 70 years ago. And that's largely a good thing, but it also means behavior gets interpreted through a different lens. This is where things get interesting. It's tempting to say Dennis obviously has ADHD, but fictional characters rarely fit neatly into real clinical criteria. Still, Dennis certainly shows behaviors people might notice. He's constantly moving. He interrupts. He struggles to think before acting. He becomes intensely focused on whatever currently interests him. He often creates chaos without meaning to. Those behaviors might absolutely lead teachers or parents to recommend an evaluation. But an evaluation isn't the same thing as a diagnosis. Real ADHD involves consistent patterns across settings that significantly affect daily functioning. We simply don't know enough about Dennis's inner life to say for certain. What we can say is that modern adults would probably ask questions that nobody asked in 1951. There's another possibility. Maybe Dennis is simply energetic, curious, fearless, creative. Children naturally test limits. They're learning how the world works. Sometimes that process involves broken windows. Sometimes it involves accidentally terrifying the neighbor. Dennis often represents childhood without filters. He's a reminder that exploration is messy. Not every loud, impulsive child has a disorder. Sometimes they're simply still learning self-control. The challenge is knowing where ordinary childhood ends and genuine support becomes necessary. That's a conversation best answered by families and professionals, not by a comic strip. Let's be honest. Poor George Wilson may be the real hero here. Imagine being retired, wanting a quiet afternoon, only to discover Dennis has somehow convinced your dog to help him dig for pirate treasure. Again. Mr. Wilson spends decades living next door to what is essentially a tiny natural disaster, and somehow he never moves. The man deserves recognition for patience alone. The reason Dennis has lasted so long isn't because he's destructive. It's because every generation recognizes someone like him. The endlessly curious child, the one with more energy than adults around him can possibly manage, the child who asks why 20 times before breakfast. Every era has had children like Dennis. What's changed isn't necessarily the children, it's how adults understand them. Modern psychology gives us better tools to recognize when children genuinely need help. At the same time, It reminds us not to mistake every burst of childhood energy for a diagnosis. Finding that balance is harder than it sounds. Dennis the Menace probably wouldn't be exactly the same child if he grew up today. Teachers might document concerns, parents might meet with counselors, someone might recommend an evaluation, or maybe he'd simply be remembered as the kid who always had dirt on his shoes and impossible ideas in his head. Either way, Dennis reminds us that childhood has always been wonderfully chaotic. The challenge isn't eliminating that chaos, it's knowing when it represents imagination and when it represents a child who could genuinely benefit from support. That's a question every generation has to answer a little differently. And perhaps that's why Dennis still feels surprisingly relevant more than 70 years later. If you enjoyed this look back at one of pop culture's most famous troublemakers, let me know in the comments. Do you think Dennis would simply be all boy today, or would modern schools and parents see something more? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the rest of the essays here on The Confusing Middle. Until next time, stay curious.